Wait, please stop. I'm sorry, wait. We need to talk about the interview.
The glass doors of Horizon Tower closed behind Daniel Reyes with a sound so soft it felt louder than a slam. For a second, he stood frozen in the lobby, as if the building itself were holding its breath with him. Sunlight spilled through the vast windows, reflecting off polished marble floors and stainless steel railings. People moved past him in smooth, confident currents, heels clicking, phones buzzing, coffee cups steaming. No one noticed the man who had just lost the most important chance of his life. Daniel tightened his grip on the strap of his worn leather bag. Inside were neatly printed resumes, each one carefully aligned the night before at his small kitchen table. He had waited until Sophia was asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling beneath the faded blanket she loved. He had ironed his only good shirt while the old heater rattled in protest, praying it wouldn't burn out again. Every detail of this morning had been prepared with one thought in mind. This has to work. But it hadn't. There had been no harsh words. No visible rejection. Just professional smiles and polite nods, the kind that said everything without saying anything at all. "We'll be in touch." 3 simple words that meant the conversation was already over. Daniel swallowed and pushed through the revolving door. Outside, the city roared with life. Traffic surged through the intersection. A street vendor called out his morning specials. Somewhere above, construction equipment clanged against steel. The world did not pause for failed interviews. It never had. He stepped down onto the sidewalk. "It's fine," he told himself. "You've been through worse," and he had. He had spent nights sleeping in his car when Sophia was still a baby because the shelter was full. He had worked warehouse shifts by day and delivery routes by night, his hands cracked, his body aching just to keep food on the table. He had learned how to stretch $20 across a week, how to smile for his daughter when he felt like collapsing, how to keep going when quitting would have been easier. But this time hurt differently. This job had been more than income. It had been a future. Health insurance that would cover Sophia's asthma inhalers without forcing him to choose between medicine and rent. Predictable hours so he wouldn't have to beg neighbors to watch her late at night. A salary that meant birthdays could include more than apologies. Stability. Daniel walked a few steps, then stopped near the edge of the sidewalk, pretending to check his phone. He didn't want to go home yet. Not when he knew what waited there. "How was the interview, Daddy?" Sophia would ask, her voice hopeful, as if the answer itself might shape the world. He didn't know how to tell her that he had tried as hard as he could, and it still hadn't been enough. Inside Horizon Tower, the interview room was already being reset. Folders were stacked. Chairs were straightened. The recruiter flipped to the next resume with the efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times. "Next candidate?" she asked. At the head of the table, Ethan Hawke did not respond. The Billionaire CEO sat back in his chair, his attention fixed on the door Daniel had just walked through. He had built Horizon Technologies from nothing, no inheritance, no investors, just relentless work and a belief that he could create something better. He was known for fast decisions and sharper instincts. Yet something about the last interview unsettled him. Daniel Reyes hadn't been impressive on paper. His experience was fragmented. There were gaps in his employment history. When asked technical questions, he had hesitated, choosing honesty over polished guesswork. To the rest of the panel, it was clear he wasn't ready, but Ethan had watched his eyes. He had seen the way Daniel leaned forward when asked about responsibility, the way his voice changed when he mentioned his daughter. There had been no desperation in it, only resolve. "Why did we pass on him?" Ethan asked suddenly. The recruiter looked up, surprised. "He didn't meet the technical benchmarks, and his background is inconsistent. We're looking for candidates who can move fast." Ethan nodded slowly. "Did anyone ask him why he was really here?" There was a pause. "He said he wanted stability," one manager offered. Ethan shook his head. "No. He said he wanted a future for his daughter." The room fell quiet. Ethan stood. "Skills can be taught," he said. "Character can't." Without another word, he walked toward the door. Back on the street, Daniel finally exhaled. He adjusted the strap of his bag and began to walk, merging into the crowd. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the city itself were pressing him down. He replayed the interview in his mind. The moment he'd stumbled over a technical question. The brief glance exchanged between the panelists, the polite nod that followed. You should have answered better, you should have studied more, you should have been more impressive. But there was only so much time in a life already filled with survival. Daniel reached the corner and waited for the light to change. Behind him, the doors of Horizon Tower slid open once more. And this time, someone was running after him. Ethan Hawke did not believe in coincidences. He had built Horizon, technologies from a one-room office above a bakery into one of the most powerful software firms in the country by trusting patterns, reading people, and acting when something felt wrong. Numbers mattered. Metrics mattered. But instinct, the quiet voice beneath the noise of data, had saved him more times than any spreadsheet ever could. And right now, that voice would not shut up. The conference room door swung closed behind Daniel Reyes, leaving a hush that felt heavier than the usual post-interview silence. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting long reflections across the polished table. The other interviewers began gathering their papers, already shifting their attention to the next candidate. Next resume? The recruiter asked. Ethan didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on the door. There had been nothing dramatic about Daniel's exit. No visible disappointment, no anger, no pleading. Just a quiet nod, a murmured thank you, and the steady walk of a man accustomed to being told no. That was what bothered Ethan. In his early years, when rejection was still unfamiliar, he had burned with frustration. When investors laughed him out of rooms, he had argued. When partners dismissed his ideas, he had pushed harder, louder, but Daniel hadn't done any of that. He had simply accepted the verdict with a dignity that suggested this wasn't the first time the world had closed a door in his face, and that was exactly what made Ethan uneasy. Why did we pass on him? Ethan asked again, his voice cutting through the quiet. The recruiter, a woman who had been with Horizon for over a decade, adjusted her glasses. He's not unqualified, Ethan, but he doesn't fit the profile we discussed. We need someone who can hit the ground running. The projects coming up are complex. High pressure. He hesitated on the systems architecture question, one of the senior managers added. And his employment history isn't linear. There are gaps. Ethan leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Did you notice how he answered? He asked. They exchanged glances. He didn't guess, Ethan continued. He didn't try to impress you with words he didn't understand. He admitted what he didn't know. That's rare. The recruiter hesitated. Honesty is good. But this isn't a classroom. We need performance. Ethan stood. Performance can be built, he said. Integrity can't. He reached for his jacket. Ethan, one of the managers said carefully, we have other candidates waiting. I know, Ethan replied. He walked out. As the elevator doors slid shut behind him, the hum of the cables descending felt louder than usual. Ethan watched the numbers count down, 35, 34, 33. He wasn't entirely sure what he was doing. This wasn't protocol. CEOs didn't chase candidates through lobbies. Billionaires didn't interrupt hiring processes based on gut feelings, but this wasn't about the role. It was about the man. Ethan's mind replayed fragments of the interview. Why do you want this position, Mr. Reyes? Because I need something steady. The words themselves had been ordinary, but the way Daniel had said them, without pretense, without ambition for status or prestige, had landed differently. Most candidates talked about growth, innovation, the company's mission. They spoke the language of corporate aspiration fluently. Daniel had spoken the language of responsibility. Ethan remembered the look in his eyes when he mentioned his daughter, not pride. Not self-pity, purpose. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Ethan stepped out into the flow of people, scanning faces. The lobby was busy, as always. Suits, briefcases, visitors checking in at the front desk. Sunlight streaming through the massive glass facade. For a moment, he didn't see Daniel. A flicker of doubt passed through him. You're overthinking this, a practical voice in his head said. You've built a company by sticking to standards. Why are you chasing someone who didn't meet them? But then he spotted him. Daniel stood near a marble pillar, phone in hand, though his gaze wasn't on the screen. He looked like a man stalling, as if the direction of his next step mattered more than it should. Ethan's pace quickened. Mr. Reyes! Daniel turned, startled. For an instant, Ethan saw something in his face that confirmed everything he had felt upstairs, not fear, not anger, but a quiet resignation. The expression of someone who had already prepared himself for disappointment and didn't expect anything else. "Yes, sir?" Daniel said. "You're leaving," Ethan said unnecessarily. Daniel nodded. "Yes, thank you for your time." The formality of it struck Ethan, not bitterness, not pleading, just respect. "Do you have a few more minutes?" Ethan asked. Daniel hesitated. I thought the interview was over." "It was," Ethan replied. "But I'm not." Daniel studied him, clearly unsure what to make of the situation. Around them, people slowed their steps, curious glances flickering in their direction. The CEO of Horizon Technologies did not often stop to speak to candidates in the lobby. "Yes," Daniel said finally. "I have time." They moved to a quiet seating area near the windows. Ethan sat first. Daniel followed, keeping his posture straight, his bag still slung over his shoulder as if he might be asked to leave at any moment. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Ethan watched him closely. Up close, Daniel looked more worn than he had in the conference room, not careless, just tired in a way that suggested years of responsibility that did not pause for exhaustion. "Why did you really want this job?" Ethan asked. Daniel opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. Ethan recognized that pause. It was the moment when someone decides whether to repeat the safe version of their story or risk telling the truth. Daniel looked down at his hands. "I have a daughter," he said quietly. "Her name is Sophia. She's 7. Ethan waited. "I've been doing contract work for years," Daniel continued. "Some months are good. Some aren't. I don't want her growing up worrying about whether we'll have to move again or if I can afford her medicine." He looked up, meeting Ethan's eyes directly. "I don't need easy. I just need steady." The words landed with unexpected force. Ethan had heard every possible motivation from job candidates: money, status, ambition, even passion. But steady was not a word that came up often in rooms built on disruption and rapid growth. "Tell me about the gaps in your employment," Ethan said. Daniel exhaled slowly as if bracing himself. "My wife left when Sophia was a year old," he said. "I had to take whatever work I could find, nights, weekends. There were times I'd turn down better paying jobs because they required travel, and I couldn't leave her. I didn't always make the right choices, but I made the ones I had to." There was no self-pity in his voice. No attempt to earn sympathy, just fact. Ethan felt a tightening in his chest that surprised him. He had not grown up poor, but he had grown up with pressure. His parents had worked relentlessly, sacrificing comfort for the hope that he would have more. He remembered the way his father's shoulders had slumped at the kitchen table late at night, bills spread out under a single light. The way his mother had smiled through exhaustion. Daniel's story wasn't the same, but it was close enough to resonate. "Come with me," Ethan said, standing. Daniel blinked. "Where?" "Upstairs." They rode the private elevator in silence. The hum of the machinery filled the space between them, punctuated only by the soft rise and fall of their breathing. Daniel stood with his hands clasped in front of him, eyes forward, clearly unsure what awaited him. Ethan studied the numbers as they climbed. He was not reconsidering the interview in the traditional sense. He already knew Daniel did not meet the company's current benchmarks, but something deeper than policy was at work here. When the doors opened, they stepped into a quieter corridor, far from the buzz of open offices. Ethan led Daniel into his office. It was spacious, but not ostentatious. Clean lines, a large desk, shelves of books instead of trophies. On the wall, a few framed photographs, Ethan with his parents in a cramped kitchen, the two of them smiling in a way that suggested pride born from struggle. Another of him years later, standing in a cluttered room with mismatched desks, the early days of Horizon. "Sit," Ethan said. Daniel did. Ethan leaned against the edge of his desk. "I built this company from nothing," he said. "No investors. No safety net? People see the headlines now and think it was easy. It wasn't. I slept on couches, missed birthdays, lost relationships because I couldn't balance ambition and life." He paused. "I learned something along the way. Skills can be taught. Software can be learned, but grit, responsibility? The kind of commitment that comes from having someone who depends on you? He shook his head. You don't fake that. Daniel listened, unsure whether this was a speech or a test. You didn't answer every question perfectly in that room, Ethan continued. But you answered honestly. And you showed me something we're short on. What's that? Daniel asked quietly. People who know what this work is actually for. Ethan picked up a folder from his desk. Daniel's application. You applied for a role that requires experience you don't yet have? Ethan said. That's true. I won't pretend otherwise. Daniel nodded. But I'm not interested in perfect resumes, Ethan went on. I'm interested in people who will build something and protect it. Who will take responsibility when things go wrong? Who will stay when it's easier to leave? He slid the folder across the desk. I'd like to offer you a position. For a moment, Daniel didn't react. He simply stared at the folder. I thought you said I didn't meet the requirements, he said. You don't, Ethan replied. Yet, Daniel swallowed. Sir, I don't want charity, Ethan straightened. Good, he said. Because that's not what this is, he leaned forward slightly. You'll start in an associate role. It's lower than what you applied for. We'll train you. Pair you with a senior engineer. You'll have 6 months to prove you can handle the responsibilities. If you can't, we'll part ways professionally. And if I can? Daniel asked. Ethan smiled faintly. Then you'll have built something for yourself here. Just like I did? Daniel's throat tightened. He thought of Sophia, of the apartment with its flickering heater, of the nights he had lain awake calculating how long he could stretch what little he had. I won't let you down, he said. I don't think you will, Ethan replied, extending his hand. They shook. After Daniel left the office, Ethan stood by the window for a long time, watching the city move below. He knew what people would say if they found out. That he had broken protocol. That he had taken a risk on someone who didn't fit the mold. That sentiment had no place in business, but Ethan also knew something else. Every turning point in his life had begun with someone seeing more in him than his circumstances suggested. He turned back to his desk. For the first time in a long while, he felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel in the world of quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. Hope. Not in the company, but in people. The lobby of Horizon Tower never truly slept. Even in the quiet hours between scheduled interviews, there was movement, security guards shifting their weight, receptionists tapping at keyboards, visitors wandering in and out beneath the towering glass ceiling. Light poured down from above, clean and sharp, reflecting off marble floors that had never known a crack. Daniel Reyes stood near one of the columns, his phone in his hand, though the screen had gone dark minutes ago. He wasn't checking messages. He was waiting for the ache in his chest to settle. Every rejection had its own shape. Some came with form letters. Others came with apologies that felt more awkward than comforting. This one had come wrapped in courtesy and professionalism, the kind that left no room for argument. There had been no cruelty in it, no dismissal. Just the unspoken truth, you're not what we need. Daniel had told himself he was used to it. He had been turned away from apartments because his credit wasn't strong enough. From better-paying jobs because his schedule had to bend around a child. From opportunities that demanded flexibility he simply didn't have. Every time he had adjusted, adapted, found another way forward. Still, standing here, he felt something heavier than disappointment. He felt tired. He thought of Sophia waiting at home, probably sitting cross-legged on the floor with her crayons, drawing castles or animals or imaginary worlds where things always worked out. He imagined her face when she asked how the interview went. Did you get the job, Daddy? He hated that he already knew the answer he would give. The careful version. The one that didn't sound like failure. The one meant to protect her. A movement in the corner of his eye pulled him back to the present. Someone was coming toward him. At first, he assumed it was a security guard. Then he recognized the stride, confident, unhurried, unmistakable. Ethan Hawke, the CEO of Horizon Technologies? Daniel straightened automatically, surprise flashing across his face. He had seen the man only from across the conference table, surrounded by executives who spoke in quiet authority. Up close, Ethan seemed less untouchable and more intensely focused, as if every moment carried weight. Mr. Reyes, Ethan said. Yes, sir? Daniel replied. You're leaving, Ethan said, stating the obvious. Daniel nodded. Yes, I appreciate the opportunity. Ethan studied him for a brief moment. Not in the way interviewers did, scanning for flaws or measuring potential. It was something more personal, more searching, as if he were trying to understand the man in front of him rather than the candidate he had been in a conference room. Do you have a few more minutes? Ethan asked. Daniel hesitated. The sensible part of him whispered that this was probably just a formality, maybe a polite follow-up, maybe an attempt to soften the rejection. But another part of him, the part that had learned to take chances when they appeared, told him to listen. I thought the interview was finished, Daniel said carefully. It was, Ethan replied. But I'm not. There was something in the way he said it that made Daniel pause. Yes, Daniel said. I have time. They moved to a quiet seating area near the windows, away from the main flow of foot traffic. The city outside shimmered with motion cars weaving through intersections, people crossing streets in determined lines. From this height, the noise of the world felt distant, almost unreal. Ethan gestured for Daniel to sit. Daniel did, setting his bag at his feet. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy, as if both men understood that whatever came next would matter. Ethan broke it first. Why did you really want this job? The question was simple. But it wasn't the same question he had asked upstairs. In the conference room, it had been formal, part of a script. Here, it felt different, more direct, more human. Daniel opened his mouth, prepared to give the polished answer, the one he had practiced the night before. But something stopped him. He looked down at his hands. I could tell you what I said in there, he began. About wanting to grow, about believing in the company's mission, Ethan waited. But that's not the whole truth. Daniel lifted his eyes. I have a daughter, he said quietly. Her name is Sophia, she's 7. The way he said her name changed his voice entirely. It softened, became warmer, as if even speaking it brought her closer. I've been doing contract work for years, Daniel continued. Some months I get enough hours. Some months I don't know what my paycheck will look like from one week to the next. I don't want her growing up with that kind of uncertainty. Ethan said nothing. I don't need to be rich, Daniel added. I don't need a corner office, I just need steady. Something I can build on. Something that means I can tell her we're going to be okay and actually know it as true. The words hung between them. Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. Tell me about the gaps in your resume, he said. Daniel exhaled. It was a question he had grown used to, and one that never got easier. My wife left when Sophia was barely a year old, he said. There wasn't any drama, she just decided motherhood wasn't for her. I became a single parent overnight, he paused. I took whatever work I could get, warehouse jobs, delivery routes, short-term tech contracts when I could find them. There were times I had to turn down better offers because they involved travel or late hours I couldn't manage with a child at home. And there were months when I fell behind. Not because I didn't want to do better, but because I had to choose between being available for my daughter and chasing the next opportunity. Ethan watched him closely. Daniel did not look ashamed. He did not look bitter. He looked resolved. I know it doesn't look good on paper, Daniel said. I know it makes me seem unreliable, but every choice I made was about making sure she was safe. That she knew I was there. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He thought of his own childhood, of the way his parents had worked tirelessly, not for luxury, but for security. He remembered watching his father come home late, shoulders slumped, still forcing a smile. Remembered his mother counting bills at the kitchen table, her voice calm even when the numbers didn't add up. Daniel's story was different in its details, but the weight of responsibility was the same. You said upstairs that you learn fast? Ethan said. Why do you think that matters? Daniel didn't answer immediately. When you don't have a safety net, he said finally, you don't get the luxury of staying the same. You either adapt or you fall behind. I've had to teach myself things just to keep working. I've had to step into roles I wasn't ready for because there was no one else to do them. I don't expect anyone to carry me. I just need the chance to prove that I can carry myself. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Ethan stood. Come with me, he said. Daniel blinked. Where? Upstairs, they walked toward the private elevator, the kind reserved for executives and high-level meetings. As the doors closed behind them, Daniel felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He had no idea what this was. A second interview? A lecture? A courtesy conversation that would end exactly where the first one had? The elevator began its smooth ascent. Neither man spoke. Daniel stared at the floor numbers as they ticked upward, his thoughts racing. Don't get your hopes up, he told himself. Hope had a way of making disappointment sharper. When the doors opened, they stepped into a quieter section of the building. The noise of the main offices faded into the background, replaced by soft lighting and a sense of distance from the everyday flow of the company. Ethan led Daniel into his office. It was larger than any room Daniel had ever worked in, but it wasn't extravagant. There were no gold accents, no showy displays, just clean lines, shelves of books, a wide desk. On the wall, a few framed photographs caught Daniel's eye. One showed a younger Ethan standing with two older people in a small kitchen. The counters were worn, the light dim, but the smiles were genuine. Another showed a cluttered room with mismatched desks, a group of people huddled around a whiteboard covered in scribbles. Ethan noticed Daniel looking. "My parents," he said, nodding toward the first photo. "And the early days of Horizon," Daniel took it in quietly. "Sit," Ethan said. Daniel did. Ethan leaned against the desk, arms folded. "I didn't grow up wealthy," he began. "People forget that now. They see what Horizon is today and assume it was inevitable. It wasn't. I worked jobs I hated to fund a dream I wasn't even sure would work. I missed birthdays, weddings, funerals. I sacrificed relationships because I didn't know how to balance ambition and life." He paused. "I learned something the hard way. Skills can be taught. Systems can be learned. But the kind of responsibility that comes from knowing someone depends on you, that's different. That changes how you show up?" Daniel listened carefully. "You didn't impress my team today," Ethan said. "Not in the traditional sense. You didn't have all the answers. You weren't polished." Daniel nodded. "But you were honest," Ethan continued. "And you showed something we don't have enough of here." "What's that?" Daniel asked. "People who know what this work is actually for," Ethan said. He picked up a folder from his desk and placed it in front of Daniel. Daniel recognized it instantly, his application. "You applied for a role that requires experience you don't yet have," Ethan said. "That's true. I won't pretend otherwise. You would struggle if we put you directly into that position." Daniel's shoulders tightened. "But," Ethan continued, "I'm not interested in perfect resumes. I'm interested in people who will grow, who will take responsibility, who will stay when things get hard." He slid the folder closer. "I want to offer you a position." Daniel stared at it. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. I thought you said I didn't meet the requirements," he said quietly. "You don't," Ethan replied. "Not for the job you applied for." Daniel's heart sank slightly. "However," Ethan added, "I'm offering you a different role, an associate position. It's lower on the ladder. You'll be trained, paired with a senior engineer. You'll have 6 months to prove you can handle the responsibilities. If you can't, we'll part ways professionally." Daniel absorbed the words slowly. "And if I can?" he asked. Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile. "Then you'll have built something for yourself here." Daniel felt a tightening in his throat. He thought of Sophia again. Of the nights she had fallen asleep on the couch while he finished work. Of the way she always tried to be brave when things were uncertain because she believed he was. "Sir," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I don't want charity." Ethan straightened. "Good," he said. "Because that's not what this is." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not giving you this because I feel sorry for you. I am giving you this because I believe you'll work harder than most people in this building. And because I think in time you'll make this company better." Daniel swallowed. "I won't let you down," he said. Ethan extended his hand. "I don't think you will." They shook. The grip was firm, decisive, an agreement forged not in paperwork but in mutual understanding. When Daniel left the office, he walked back through the quiet corridor and into the elevator. As the doors closed, he leaned back against the wall, his breath finally leaving him in a long exhale. It had happened so fast that it barely felt real. A chance, not a guarantee. Not a promise of an easy future, but something he hadn't had in a very long time. When the elevator opened to the lobby, the same sunlight poured in, the same people moved through the space. Everything looked exactly as it had when he had stood here moments earlier, believing he was walking away empty-handed. But he wasn't. He stepped outside, the noise of the city rushing back around him. For the first time in years, the weight on his chest felt lighter. He took out his phone and opened a message to the one person who mattered more than any job, any building, any offer. Hey, Sophia, I'll be home soon. I didn't get the job I asked for, but I got something better. He paused, then added, a chance. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and started walking. This time, not away from something, but toward a future he could finally begin to believe in. Daniel Reyes did not sleep that night. He lay on the narrow couch in his apartment, one arm draped protectively over the edge as if Sophia might wander in during a dream and need him. The ceiling fan hummed softly above, stirring warm air that never quite cooled the room. Outside, the city breathed in low, distant sounds, cars passing, a siren far away, the muted voices of neighbors through thin walls. His phone sat on the coffee table, screen dark, but his message to Sophia replayed in his mind again and again. A chance. It felt fragile, like something that could vanish if he held it too tightly. He turned onto his side and stared at the faint outline of the door to Sophia's room. He could picture her inside sprawled sideways across her bed, one foot tangled in the blanket, clutching the worn, stuffed rabbit she had carried everywhere since she was 3. The thought of her small body trusting the world because she trusted him made his chest ache. He had been given something more dangerous than certainty. He had been given hope. For years, Daniel had learned to live without it. Hope made the falls harder. When every day was about getting through, not getting ahead, you didn't dream, you planned, you calculated, you survived. Now there was a future standing just out of reach, waiting to see if he could step into it. He closed his eyes and whispered into the quiet, I won't waste this. The next morning, Daniel woke before his alarm. Sophia was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with her coloring books spread in front of her. Sunlight streamed through the small window, painting her dark curls gold at the edges. Daddy, she said when she saw him. Did you get the job? Daniel poured himself a glass of water, giving himself a second to steady his voice. I didn't get the job I asked for, he said. Her smile faltered. But, he continued, kneeling beside her chair, I got something better. She tilted her head. Better than the job? I got a chance, he said. They want me to start in a different position, they'll train me. If I work hard, I can move up. Sophia studied his face, searching for uncertainty. She was young, but she had learned early how to read him. You're not sad? She asked. He shook his head. I'm hopeful, he said. Her grin returned, brighter than before. She wrapped her arms around his neck. I knew you would, she said confidently, as if this outcome had never been in doubt. Daniel held her for a moment longer than usual. Horizon Technologies was even more intimidating from the inside when you weren't walking in as a visitor. On his first day, Daniel stood in the lobby wearing the same suit he had worn to the interview, freshly pressed but still unmistakably worn at the edges. He clutched his new ID badge like proof that he belonged here. An HR representative met him at the front desk. Daniel Reyes? She asked. Yes, ma'am. Welcome to Horizon, she said with a smile. We'll get you set up. As they walked through the open office floors, Daniel took everything in. Rows of desks with dual monitors, whiteboards covered in diagrams and half-erased ideas, conversations that shifted between technical language and casual jokes. He felt like a guest in a world that moved faster than anything he had known. This will be your team, the HR rep said, stopping near a cluster of desks. A tall man with sandy hair looked up from his screen. Daniel? He asked. I'm Mark, I'll be your mentor. Daniel shook his hand. Nice to meet you, he said. Mark smiled. Don't worry. We'll take it one step at a time, one step at a time. Daniel repeated the words silently as he sat down at his new desk. The first weeks were brutal. Not because anyone treated him poorly, but because the learning curve was steeper than anything he had faced before. Every day was a reminder of how much he didn't know. He stayed late, not because anyone asked him to, but because he refused to fall behind. He asked questions until he could sense when he was nearing the edge of irritation and then asked one more anyway. He took notes on everything, filling notebook after notebook with diagrams, terms, reminders. At night, after Sophia fell asleep, he opened his laptop at the kitchen table and practiced what he had learned. The same table where he had once spread out unpaid bills was now covered in printouts and scribbled equations. Some nights, exhaustion crept in so deeply that his eyes burned and his hands shook slightly over the keyboard. On those nights, doubt whispered, what if they were right? What if you're not enough for this world? What if you fail? Daniel would glance toward Sophia's room and answer the doubt the only way he knew how. Then I learn more tomorrow. Mark proved to be patient, but demanding. You can't just memorize this stuff, he said one afternoon, tapping a diagram on Daniel's screen. You have to understand why it works. I'm trying, Daniel said. I know, Mark replied. That's why I'm pushing you. Not everyone was as kind. Some coworkers were polite but distant, their glances lingering a fraction too long when Daniel asked what they considered basic questions. Others spoke quickly in meetings, not slowing down when he struggled to keep up. Daniel never complained. He had been underestimated before. He knew how to outwork doubt. One evening, as he was packing up to leave, his phone buzzed. School called today. The message read, Sophia had a coughing spell in class. She's okay now. Daniel's stomach tightened. He typed back immediately. I'm on my way. He left the office earlier than usual, heart pounding as he took the elevator down. By the time he reached Sophia's school, she was sitting in the nurse's office, swinging her legs gently from the exam table. I'm fine, Daddy, she said, as soon as she saw him. He knelt in front of her. You scared me, he said softly. She shrugged. It just got hard to breathe for a little bit. He held her hand, feeling how small it was in his. That night, after she fell asleep, Daniel stared at the insurance paperwork Horizon had provided him. For the first time in years, he didn't have to wonder if he could afford the next doctor's visit. The weight of that realization pressed into him more heavily than any workload ever could. Halfway through his third month, Daniel made a mistake. It wasn't catastrophic. No data was lost. No system crashed. But it was visible something that required intervention from a senior engineer to fix. Daniel stood at his desk afterward, his chest tight, waiting for the consequences he knew would come. Mark approached. You want to walk me through what happened? He asked. Daniel did, carefully, honestly. Mark nodded. Okay, he said. Here's where it went wrong. And here's how we fix it next time. That was it. No anger, no lectures. Just expectation. Daniel realized something then. Horizon wasn't waiting for him to fail. They were watching to see if he would rise. Time moved quickly. Weeks turned into months. Daniel's notes grew more precise, his questions more targeted. He began to recognize patterns, anticipate issues before they became problems. He still stayed late, but not out of desperation, out of discipline. One afternoon, he was invited to sit in on a meeting he normally wouldn't attend. As he listened, something clicked. He spoke up, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. What if we approach it this way? He suggested, outlining a solution based on something he had been studying. The room fell silent. Daniel felt his heart thud in his ears. Then someone nodded. That could work, another engineer said. The discussion shifted, building on his idea. Daniel sat back, stunned. For the first time, he wasn't just catching up. He was contributing. At home, Sophia noticed the changes before anyone else. You smile more, she said one night as they ate dinner. He laughed softly. Do I? She said. And you don't look tired all the time anymore. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Things are getting better, he said. She grinned. I told you they would. Near the end of his 6-month probation, Daniel was called into Ethan Hawke's office. The message alone made his pulse spike. He stood in front of the same door he had walked through months earlier, remembering the day his future had changed. Inside, Ethan gestured for him to sit. How are you finding things? Ethan asked. Daniel answered honestly. It's been hard. But it's been worth it. Ethan nodded. Your mentor speaks highly of you. Your team does too. Daniel waited. You know, this was never about charity, Ethan said. Yes, sir. It was about potential, Ethan continued, and about whether you would do something with it. He slid a document across the desk. We'd like to make your position permanent, Ethan said. Daniel stared at the paper, barely breathing. Permanent, no more probation, no more uncertainty. You earned this, Ethan added. Daniel swallowed. Thank you, he said quietly. Ethan studied him for a moment. You know, he said, when I ran after you that day in the lobby, people thought I was being impulsive. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe you were. Ethan's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Maybe. That evening, Daniel walked home slower than usual. He wanted to savor the feeling. The city lights flickered on as the sun dipped below the buildings, casting everything in a soft glow. People hurried past him, unaware that his world had just shifted again. When he opened the apartment door, Sophia was waiting. Daddy, she said, you're home early. He knelt and hugged her tightly. They made my job permanent, he said into her hair. She pulled back, eyes wide. That means you get to stay? He nodded. She wrapped her arms around him. I'm so proud of you, she said. The words hit him harder than any praise he had received at work. He held her, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. For the first time in his life, Daniel Reyes was no longer just surviving, he was building, not just a career, a future. The morning Daniel Reyes first arrived at Horizon as a permanent employee, he didn't rush. For years, his days had begun in a scramble, alarm ringing too early, coffee gulped down while tying his shoes. Sophia's backpack checked for forgotten homework, the clock always moving faster than he could. But this morning was different. He stood at the small kitchen counter, watching sunlight creep across the floor, listening to the quiet rhythm of his home. Sophia sat at the table, carefully braiding a piece of string around the handle of her lunch bag. You're smiling again, she said without looking up. Daniel chuckled. I guess I am. She beamed at him. That means today's going to be a good day. He bent down and kissed the top of her head. You always say that? Because it's always true when you smile like that. He paused, struck by the simple certainty in her voice. Children had a way of believing in futures adults were still afraid to imagine. When he walked her to school that morning, the sky was clear, the kind of blue that made the city feel lighter. As he watched her join her friends on the steps, backpack bouncing against her shoulders, he felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Not relief. Not pride, belonging. Horizon Technologies no longer felt like a place he was trying to survive. It felt like a place he was building. His days were still demanding. The projects were complex, the expectations high. But there was a difference now. He wasn't constantly trying to prove that he deserved to be there. He was there because he had earned it. Daniel's role expanded quickly. He was asked to mentor a new associate, a recent graduate who reminded him of himself in the early days, eager, overwhelmed, determined not to make mistakes. Don't worry about knowing everything, Daniel told him one afternoon. Worry about learning something every day. The words surprised him as he said them. They felt like a reflection of how far he had come. His colleagues began seeking his input, not out of courtesy, but because they trusted his judgment. Meetings that once intimidated him now felt like spaces where his voice mattered. The systems he had once struggled to understand were becoming familiar, even intuitive. But what mattered most to Daniel wasn't the recognition. It was the life he was finally able to build outside the office. On a warm spring evening, Daniel sat in the audience of Sophia's school auditorium, his hands folded tightly in his lap. The stage was decorated with cardboard stars and painted clouds. Parents filled the rows, murmuring and shifting, phones ready to capture every moment. The lights dimmed, and the first notes of the music floated through the room. Then Sophia stepped onto the stage. She wore a simple costume, a silver sash over a blue dress, but to Daniel, she looked radiant. As she sang, her voice clear and steady, he felt something tighten behind his eyes. For years he had feared moments like this. Not because they weren't beautiful, but because he had worried he might miss them. Late shifts, extra jobs. Nights when survival demanded his presence elsewhere. Now he was here. When the performance ended, Sophia spotted him immediately in the crowd. She waved wildly, her smile brighter than any spotlight. Afterward, she ran into his arms. Did you see me? She asked breathlessly. I didn't miss a second, he said. She looked at him, studying his face with the seriousness only children could manage. You always come now, she said. The words weren't an accusation. They were a truth. And they filled him with something deeper than pride. They filled him with peace. Months later, Horizon launched a major project, one that would redefine a core part of the company's infrastructure. The pressure was intense. Deadlines tightened. Meetings ran long. Everyone felt the weight of expectations from investors and clients. Daniel found himself at the center of it. Late one night, he sat at his desk, lines of code reflected in his tired eyes. Around him, the office was quiet except for the hum of computers and the distant murmur of the cleaning crew. Mark stopped by, coffee in hand. You've been here since this morning, he said. Daniel shrugged. Almost done. Mark studied the screen. You could leave this for tomorrow. Daniel shook his head. If I fix it now, the team can move faster in the morning. Mark smiled faintly. You know, when you first started, I thought you'd burn out. Daniel glanced up. So did I. But you didn't, Mark continued. You built something here. Daniel leaned back in his chair, considering that. I had a reason, he said simply. Mark nodded, understanding more than Daniel had ever said out loud. The project was a success. When the final presentation was delivered and the applause filled the conference room, Daniel felt a quiet satisfaction settle over him. Not triumph. Not celebration. Completion. Later that day, as the office buzzed with congratulations, Ethan Hawke stopped by Daniel's desk. You did good work, Ethan said. Thank you, Daniel replied. Ethan hesitated for a moment. You remember the day I ran after you in the lobby? He asked. Daniel smiled. Hard to forget. I've thought about it more than once, Ethan said. About how close we were to never having this conversation, to never knowing what you could do. Daniel studied him. Why did you really do it? Ethan leaned against the edge of the desk. Because I saw someone walking away who shouldn't have had to, he said. And because sometimes the people who don't ask for attention are the ones who deserve it most. Daniel nodded slowly. That day changed everything for me, he said. Ethan's gaze softened. For me too. Not long after, Horizon held its annual company gathering. It was an evening event at a downtown venue, complete with lights, music, and speeches about growth and innovation. Daniel attended with Sophia, who wore a simple dress and clutched his hand tightly as they entered the large hall. She looked around in awe. Is this where you work? She whispered. Sort of, Daniel said with a smile. Colleagues greeted him as they walked through the crowd. Daniel, this must be your daughter. Sophia straightened proudly. I'm Sophia. She talks about you all the time, someone said to Daniel. He laughed. I talk about her too. Later in the evening, Ethan took the stage to address the company. He spoke about milestones, about the future of Horizon, about the people who made it all possible. Then his gaze moved through the crowd until it found Daniel. There are moments in the life of a company that remind us why we do what we do, Ethan said. Why growth isn't just about numbers. It's about people. Daniel felt Sophia's hand tighten around his. Some time ago, Ethan continued, I made a decision that went against protocol. I offered a chance to someone who didn't fit the mold we thought we needed. A murmur rippled through the room. That person didn't just rise to the challenge, Ethan said. He changed the way we think about potential. Daniel's chest tightened. Sophia, he whispered, I think he's talking about me. Her eyes widened. Really? Ethan's gaze remained on Daniel. Daniel Reyes, he said. Thank you for reminding us that the best investments we make are in people who carry more than ambition. They carry purpose. The applause that followed felt distant, almost unreal. Daniel stood, Sophia still holding his hand, and nodded in acknowledgement. He wasn't used to being seen like this. But he didn't feel uncomfortable. He felt complete. That night, as they walked home under the city lights, Sophia skipped beside him. Daddy, she said. You're famous now, he laughed. Definitely not. But everyone clapped for you, she insisted. He knelt beside her, meeting her eyes. They weren't clapping for me, he said. They were clapping for what happens when someone gets a chance and doesn't to give up. She considered this, then smiled. I always knew you wouldn't give up, he hugged her, holding her a little tighter than usual. Years passed. Not in a blur, but in moments. In mornings filled with quiet breakfasts. In afternoons spent helping with homework. In evenings at school events, soccer games, science fairs, Daniel's role at Horizon continued to grow. He became a lead on major projects, then a manager of a small team. His name began to appear in company reports. His opinions were sought in strategy meetings. But no promotion, no title ever mattered to him more than the life waiting for him at home. Sophia grew taller, her questions more complex, her dreams bolder. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching the city through the window, she turned to him. "Daddy, do you ever think about that day you didn't get the job?" Daniel smiled. "All the time. Are you glad you didn't get it?" she asked. He considered the question carefully. "I'm glad I didn't stop when I didn't get it," he said. "I'm glad I kept walking long enough for someone to see me." She nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes at school," she said, "when someone feels left out, I talk to them. Because I know what it's like when people don't see you." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "You learned that from me?" he asked. She smiled. "I learned it from us." One late afternoon, years after that first interview, Daniel found himself standing in the lobby of Horizon Tower once again. But this time, he wasn't carrying a worn bag of resumes. He was waiting. Across the room, a young man stood near the entrance, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes fixed on the floor. In his hand, a folder gripped too tightly. Daniel recognized the posture immediately. He walked over. "First interview?" Daniel asked gently. The young man looked up, startled. "Yeah. I don't think it went very well," Daniel smiled, not unkindly. "Sometimes the first door isn't the one that opens," he said. "But that doesn't mean you stop knocking." The young man nodded, a flicker of hope crossing his face. "Thank you," he said. As the young man walked away, Daniel felt a quiet satisfaction. Not because he had offered advice, but because he had become the kind of person who could. That evening, Daniel arrived home to find Sophia waiting in the kitchen, papers spread out across the table. "What's all this?" he asked. She looked up, eyes bright. "College applications." His heart skipped. "You're already thinking about that?" She shrugged. "I want to be ready." He sat beside her. "You can be anything you want," he said. She smiled. "I know. Because you showed me." Later that night, after Sophia went to bed, Daniel stood by the window, looking out at the city that had once felt so overwhelming. He thought of the man he had been when he first walked out of Horizon Tower, tired, uncertain, carrying the weight of a future he wasn't sure he could provide. He thought of the moment Ethan had called after him, of the chance that had changed everything, not just his career. His life. Daniel didn't believe in fate. He believed in choices, in showing up, in walking forward even when you thought there was nowhere left to go. He turned off the light and headed toward Sophia's room, pausing at the doorway to watch her sleep. For years he had promised her a better future. Now he was living it with her. Not because he was lucky, but because someone had seen him. And because he had never stopped being the man who would do anything for his child. The future they built wasn't made of headlines or applause. It was made of mornings together, of steady work, of love that never wavered. And that, Daniel knew, was worth more than any title the world could ever give him.